Welcome to the ninth Goodman Lecture presented by Kensei Foundation. I'm Trent Walker, member of the Kensei Foundation Academic Development Committee, as well as a postdoc at the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford University. And as you know, today's lecture features a lecture by Professor Evyatar Schulman on creating the early discourses of the Buddha. And I'll say a little bit more about our speaker in just a minute. Most of you are probably already familiar with Kensei Foundation and the Goodman Lectures. In case you aren't, I encourage you to check out www.kenseifoundation.org to learn more about the organization, its founder, Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche, the diverse kinds of projects we partner with across the world, as well as the vision for this particular lecture series in honor of Professor Stephen Goodman. As always, we'll have a period of discussion after Professor Schulman's talk. And as I mentioned before, to ask a question, please submit it to KF Q&A in the chat box, and I'll pose selected questions directly to our speaker. So really looking forward to that portion of the event today. Kensei Foundation, as you know, has the pleasure of partnering with Buddhist studies programs and universities all across the world, in Asia, Europe, North America, and beyond. And our partnership with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem is actually our first in West Asia. Through Professor Schulman's dynamic vision and advocacy on behalf of Buddhist studies at that university, coupled with Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche's transformative visit to the university in 2018, Kensei Foundation is delighted to be able to sponsor a permanent position in Tibetan Buddhist studies there, namely the Kensei Professor in Buddhist Studies, which was filled this past fall by Ian McCormack, now a lecturer in the Department of Comparative Religion and Asian Studies. Kensei Foundation is also very fortunate to have the chance to support graduate students in Buddhist studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, as well as other forms of Buddhist studies programming, including international conferences. Indeed, some elements of the book connected to Professor Schulman's talk today were first delivered at a conference he organized there in December 2019 on the idea of text in Buddhism. And so today we're very lucky to have Professor Schulman with us for this event, especially as his latest book, Visions of the Buddha, Creative Dimensions of Early Buddhist Scripture, was just released late this past year. Professor Schulman, for those who don't know, is one of the most innovative scholars of Buddhist texts in the fields. And it's really his energetic new approach to Pali texts that has really begun to transform our understanding of the earliest layers of the Buddhist tradition. Professor Schulman was trained at the same institution where he now teaches after periods of teaching elsewhere in Israel. His dissertation, The Fullness of Emptiness, dealt with the seminal second century Buddhist thinker Nagarjuna. And it's this engagement that resulted in several articles on Nagarjuna's thought, as well as a complete Hebrew translation of Nagarjuna's most famous work in Sanskrit, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. Professor Schulman has since, in his scholarship, turned towards Buddhist texts preserved in Pali, the sacred language of the Theravada tradition. One aspect of this new direction in his work has focused on what were perhaps the oldest Buddhist poems, namely parts of the Sutta Nibbata, the Parayana Vagga and the Atthaka Vagga, a subject on which he has published several widely cited articles. At the same time, his work has also illuminated core aspects of the oldest layers of the Buddhist philosophical tradition. And it's through his 2014 book, Rethinking the Buddha, Early Buddhist Philosophy as Meditative Perception, that offered a bold new take on the Four Noble Truths, on dependent origination, on the doctrine of anatta or non-self or selflessness, arguing that these philosophical concepts originated not as general teachings, but rather specific insights to be cultivated in advanced stages of meditation. And indeed, it's this capacity of Professor Schulman to overturn previously established views in the field that's very much displayed in the latest phase of his work, which I understand he'll be sharing with us more about today. And it's in this phase that he has begun to illuminate the literary world of Pali scriptures, often in quite unexpected ways. His articles on the nature of protective chants and cosmology and on sophisticated literary devices in Pali texts are part of this exploration, but his most recent work has offered new angles on the formulaic nature of Buddhist scriptures, particularly through a concept he calls the play of formulas, or the creative and performative ways that early Buddhists brought together the elemental building blocks of Buddhist scripture in new ways. And so for a brilliant one chapter exposition of some of these ideas, I highly recommend his contribution to this book, The Language of the Sutras, Essays in Honor of Luis Gomez, edited by Natalie Gummer. And his essay there entitled Orality and Creativity in Early Buddhist Discourses, Stock Formulas as an Aspect of Oral Textual Culture in Early Buddhism. Well, it has a very long title, is a very readable and compelling essay. And in fact, I really recommend this whole volume, which really offers a quite compelling set of essays and perspectives. The fullest statement of Professor Schulman's re-envisioning of how Buddhist scriptures came to be, however, really comes in the form of his latest work, Visions of the Buddha, that I mentioned just before. And for me, it's really by far the most human-centered and emotionally astute account of these texts that I've ever read. And if we're able to, I think, set aside for a moment the intellectual wizardry and grasp of the field of Professor Schulman's scholarship, it's really this capacity to see the past and religious texts in human terms, to feel deeply the creative possibilities that early Buddhists themselves cultivated, that perhaps impresses me most about Professor Schulman's scholarship. And for that reason, I really trust that all of us here are in for a treat with his lecture today. So without further ado, I'd like you all to please join me in welcoming Professor Schulman. Thank you so much for being here with us today. The floor is yours.